The morning sun glinted off the ocean as Elena Morgan stepped out of the taxi in front of Sapphire Bay Resort. The driver helped her retrieve her single suitcase from the trunk. She thanked him with a warm smile and a generous tip, which he accepted. With surprise, most guests who came to this place didn't bother with such kindness. Elena stretched her back, sore from the commercial flight she'd taken the previous night. She wasn't used to flying economy anymore, but all the first-class seats had been booked. It didn't really matter to her. Before meeting her husband, she'd rarely traveled at all, let alone in luxury. She looked up at the resort's grand entrance, an impressive archway of white marble with Sapphire Bay, written in elegant blue lettering. Palm trees lined the pathway, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Elena adjusted her plain cotton sweater, comfortable but well-worn, and brushed some wrinkles from her jeans. She hadn't bothered dressing up for travel, especially since Alexander wasn't with her. He was supposed to join her tomorrow, once his business meetings in Hong Kong wrapped up. "This place is even prettier than the pictures," she murmured to herself, taking in the view of crystal blue waters visible beyond the resort grounds. After the stress of the past few months with Alexander working around the clock on his company's new energy initiative, they both needed this vacation badly. Elena wheeled her suitcase through the grand entrance, immediately noticing how other guests were dressed. Designer swimwear covered by silk wraps, expensive sunglasses, jewelry that caught the light with each movement. She stood out in her simple clothes, but she didn't mind. She'd never been one to flaunt wealth, even after 5 years of marriage to one of the richest men in the world. The lobby was a masterpiece of luxury, marble floors polished to mirror-like perfection, chandeliers dripping with crystals, and fresh flower arrangements taller than Elena herself. Staff members in crisp uniforms moved efficiently, attending to guests with practiced smiles. Elena approached the reception desk where a young man with perfectly styled hair glanced up at her, his welcoming smile faltering slightly as he took in her appearance. "Good morning," Elena said pleasantly. "I have a reservation, the presidential suite." The receptionist's eyebrows rose ever so slightly. His fingers hovered over his keyboard. "The presidential suite?" he repeated, his tone suggesting he must have misheard. "Yes, under Morgan," Elena replied, pulling out her phone to find the confirmation email she'd received. "One moment, please." The receptionist typed something into his computer, then frowned slightly. He turned to whisper to a colleague, a woman with a severe bun who kept glancing at Elena with obvious skepticism. Elena noticed their exchange but wasn't particularly bothered. This kind of thing had happened before. People tended to make assumptions, based on appearances, and she rarely dressed the part of a billionaire's wife. The woman with the severe bun approached. Her name tag read, Assistant Manager Vivian. She offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry. There seems to be some confusion. The presidential suites are reserved for our distinguished clientele only. Perhaps you meant to book a standard room?" Elena shook her head. "No, I'm quite certain it's the presidential suite. My husband made the booking personally." She showed them her phone screen with the confirmation email. Vivian glanced at it with barely concealed doubt. "Yes, I see. However, there appears to be a system error. That suite is actually reserved for Mr. Alexander Morgan of Morgan Industries, who is arriving tomorrow." "That's correct," Elena replied calmly. "I'm Elena Morgan, his wife. I'm checking in today and he'll join me tomorrow." A flicker of disbelief crossed Vivian's face. She exchanged another look with the receptionist. "Do you have any identification, Mrs. Morgan?" The way she said Mrs. Morgan made it clear she didn't believe Elena for a second. Elena reached for her wallet, only to realize with a sinking feeling that she'd packed it in her suitcase after buying a magazine at the airport. "I do, but it's in my luggage. Give me just a moment to get it." As she bent to open her suitcase, she heard Vivian mutter something to the receptionist about another one trying to scam an upgrade. Elena's cheeks flushed slightly, but she kept her composure. She'd learned long ago that getting angry only made these situations worse. Just as she located her wallet, a loud group entered the lobby, a family arguing about their itinerary. The commotion distracted everyone, and in her haste to move out of their way, Elena accidentally knocked over her open suitcase, spilling some of its contents onto the polished floor. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, quickly gathering her scattered belongings. Her phone slipped from her hand and skittered across the floor, landing with a crack that made her wince. One of the security guards, who had been watching the exchange with interest, stepped forward to help. He handed her the phone. Screen now cracked across one corner. "Thank you," Elena said, trying to turn it on. The screen remained black. Perfect timing for a dead battery. Mrs. Morgan, was it? Vivian's tone had shifted from skeptical to condescending. "Perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting." She gestured toward a small office off the main lobby. Elena followed her, pulling her suitcase behind her. She felt several pairs of eyes tracking her movement. In the office, she found not just Vivian, but a man in an expensive suit, his expression stern. "I'm Bradley Wilson, the resort manager," he said without offering his hand. "There seems to be a situation here." "Just a misunderstanding," Elena replied. "I'm Elena Morgan, checking into the presidential suite that my husband reserved. My identification is right here." She held out her driver's license. Bradley barely glanced at it. Anyone can get a fake ID these days, and coincidentally choose the name of one of our most valued expected guests. His tone suggested he'd dealt with scammers before. The real Mrs. Morgan would have arrived with security, probably in a private car. Not alone, dressed like, well, he gestured vaguely at her outfit. Elena took a deep breath. "Mr. Wilson, I understand your concern, but I am who I say I am. My husband and I prefer to keep a low profile when possible. He's flying in tomorrow, on our private jet, but I took a commercial flight because I wanted to arrive earlier. If you just call him Mrs. Morgan, the real Mrs. Morgan, wouldn't need to name drop or make excuses," Bradley interrupted. "And she certainly wouldn't be trying to check in without proper arrangements." "My phone is dead," Elena explained, holding up her unresponsive device. "If I could just charge it, I could show you photos, call my husband, whatever you need." "I think we've heard enough," Bradley said firmly. "This is an exclusive resort and we take security very seriously. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before we contact the authorities." Elena stared at him, momentarily speechless. In 5 years of being married to Alexander, she'd been mistaken for a staff member, a journalist, even a gold digger at charity events, but she'd never been actually thrown out of anywhere. "This is ridiculous," she finally said. "Check the reservation details, call the number listed, verify my identity." "The reservation was made by Mr. Morgan's executive assistant," Bradley replied, "and we respect our guests' privacy too much to bother Mr. Morgan with this situation." He stood up, making it clear the conversation was over. "Security will escort you out." 2 security guards appeared in the doorway as if they'd been waiting for this moment. Elena looked between them, and Bradley, realizing that this was actually happening. Part of her wanted to make a scene, to demand they check everything, to insist they were making a terrible mistake. But a larger part of her, the part that had grown up in a small town where dignity mattered more than anything, refused to beg. "Fine," she said quietly, gathering her belongings. "But you should know that my husband will hear about this." Bradley smirked. "I'm sure Mr. Morgan will be very interested in your story." The sarcasm in his voice was unmistakable. Elena allowed herself to be escorted through the lobby, aware of the curious stares from guests and staff alike. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" And another voice replied, "Just some nobody who thought she could sneak into the presidential suite." The security guards led her all the way to the main gate, where they left her standing on the curb with her single suitcase. The midday sun beat down mercilessly. Elena found a small patch of shade and sat on her suitcase, trying to figure out what to do next. Her phone was dead, she was unfamiliar with the area, and the resort staff clearly weren't going to help her. A shuttle bus pulled up, and the driver, an older man with kind eyes, noticed her sitting alone. "You okay, miss?" he called through his open window. "My phone died and there's been a misunderstanding with my reservation," Elena explained, not wanting to go into details. "I've got a charger you can use," he offered. "And there's air conditioning in the bus. You're welcome to sit while you sort things out." Elena thanked him gratefully and climbed aboard the empty shuttle. As she plugged in her phone, waiting for it to gather enough charge to turn on, she thought about what Alexander would say when he heard about this. Her quiet, methodical husband rarely showed anger, but when it came to people disrespecting those he loved, he could be coldly, precisely vengeful. In 2 hours, everything at Sapphire Bay Resort was going to change. But for now, Elena Morgan, the simple woman they'd just kicked out, simply waited for her phone to charge, her dignity intact despite everything. Elena sat quietly in the empty shuttle bus, grateful for the air conditioning and the kindness of the driver. The man, whose name badge read Ray, had given her a bottle of water and allowed her to use his phone charger. Small acts of kindness from strangers always touched her more deeply than the grand gestures she'd grown accustomed to in her new life. "Resort giving you trouble?" Ray asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Elena sipped her water. "Just a misunderstanding about my reservation." "Happens more than you'd think at these fancy places," Ray said, shaking his head. "They judge a book by its cover real quick." Elena smiled slightly. If only they knew what kind of book they were judging. Her husband Alexander wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of wealthy that changed economies when he made business decisions. Not that material things had ever impressed Elena. She'd fallen in love with the quiet, thoughtful man behind the fortune, not the zeros in his bank account. Her phone screen finally lit up as it gathered enough charge to turn on. She had 3 missed calls from Alexander and a text asking if she'd arrived safely. She quickly typed a reply, trying to decide how much to tell him. Elena wasn't one to make scenes or demand special treatment because of who her husband was, but this situation had gone beyond rudeness into outright humiliation. Back at the resort, Bradley Wilson was feeling quite pleased with himself. He'd handled the potential security breach swiftly and decisively. In his first week as manager, he was already proving his worth to the owners. Sapphire Bay catered to the ultra-wealthy, and maintaining their exclusive atmosphere was paramount. "You handled that well," Vivian told him as they walked back through the lobby. "We get people trying to scam upgrades all the time, but claiming to be Mrs. Morgan? That was bold." Bradley straightened his designer tie. "I've dealt with worse. Did you see her outfit? As if the real wife of Alexander Morgan would dress like that." A bellhop nearby overheard their conversation. He hesitated, then spoke up. "Excuse me, Mr. Wilson, but I think I should mention something." Bradley turned, annoyed at the interruption. "Yes?" "I've worked at the Four Seasons where the Morgans stayed last year," the young man said nervously. "And Mrs. Morgan actually does dress very casually. I remember because everyone was surprised how normal she seemed." Bradley's face darkened. "No one asked for your input. The woman was clearly a fraud. Now get back to work before I report this interruption to HR." The bellhop quickly walked away, but his words had planted a tiny seed of doubt in Bradley's mind. He pushed it aside. Impossible. The real Elena Morgan would have arrived with an entourage, dressed impeccably, dripping with subtle displays of wealth. Everyone knew that. Outside in the shuttle, Elena's phone had finally charged enough to make a call. She dialed Alexander's number, knowing he was probably in a meeting but hoping he might answer anyway. To her relief, he picked up on the third ring. "Elena, is everything all right?" His voice was concerned. Alexander always seemed to know when something was wrong. "Not exactly," she replied, trying to keep her tone light. "I've run into a bit of a situation at the resort." "What kind of situation?" His voice took on that focused quality she recognized, the one that made business competitors nervous. Elena explained what had happened, downplaying the humiliation but giving him the facts. As she spoke, she could almost feel his anger building. On the other end of the line, though, his voice remained perfectly controlled. "I see," he said when she finished. There was a pause. "Are you somewhere comfortable now?" "Yes. A shuttle driver named Ray has been very kind. I'm in his bus with the air conditioning on." "Good. Stay there. I'll handle this." His tone was calm but had that edge to it, the one that meant someone was about to regret their choices. Alexander, don't change your plans. You have important meetings. They're already canceled, he interrupted. I was wrapping up early to surprise you. My plane is being prepared as we speak. Elena felt a wave of emotion. After 12 years of marriage, he still went out of his way to surprise her. You don't need to rush, I can find another hotel. Elena, he said gently. My wife was just thrown out of a resort like a trespasser. This isn't about a room anymore. She knew that tone too well to argue. Don't be too hard on them. They thought they were doing their job. Their job is hospitality, not humiliation. His voice softened. I'll see you soon. 2 hours at most. After they hung up, Elena sat back, in the shuttle seat. Ray glanced at her through the mirror. Everything okay? It will be, she replied. My husband is coming. He local? Ray asked. Elena smiled slightly. He's on his way from Hong Kong. Ray's eyebrows shot up. Hong Kong? That's halfway around. The world? He travels fast, was all Elena said. Back at the resort, the lunch hour was in full swing. Guests in designer swimwear lounged by the infinity pools while servers brought colorful cocktails on silver trays. Bradley Wilson moved through the crowd, stopping occasionally to check that everything was perfect. This was his domain now, and he was determined to run it flawlessly. His phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Owner on line 1, urgent. Bradley frowned. The resort's owner, a hospitality magnate who owned 30 luxury properties worldwide, rarely called managers directly. He hurried to his office and picked up the phone. Mr. Davidson, what a pleasure. Wilson, the owner cut him off. Tell me you didn't just eject Elena Morgan from my flagship resort. Bradley felt the blood drain from his face. Sir, there was a woman claiming to be Mrs. Morgan, but she clearly wasn't. Wasn't what? Dressed like you expected? Traveling? With security? Did you bother to verify her identity before throwing her out? Sir, she had no proper ID. She arrived in a taxi alone, wearing clothes from a department store. The real Mrs. Morgan was a kindergarten teacher from Ohio before she married Alexander, Davidson snapped. She hates flashy displays and often travels commercially when he's not with her. This is all in the VIP guest profiles, which you obviously didn't bother to check. Bradley's stomach twisted into knots. But sir, our protocol for high-value guests, your protocol should include basic courtesy and thorough verification before embarrassing guests. Davidson's voice had risen to a shout. Do you have any idea what you've done? Alexander Morgan isn't just a billionaire. He's an investor in our parent company. He was considering buying a significant stake in our Asian expansion. Bradley sank into his chair, the full weight of his mistake crashing down on him. I didn't know. That's the problem. You didn't know, but you acted like you did. Davidson took a deep breath, clearly trying to calm himself. Morgan's office just called me. He's diverted his private jet and will be there in less than 2 hours. Fix this, Wilson. Fix it now or don't bother coming to work tomorrow. The line went dead. Bradley sat frozen, staring at the phone. Then he jumped up. Vivian, he shouted, rushing out of his office. We have an emergency. Word spread through the resort staff like wildfire. The woman they'd ejected was actually Elena Morgan. The quiet, unassuming woman in jeans and a simple sweater was married to one of the most powerful men in the business world. And he was now flying in, presumably furious. Staff members who had snickered behind Elena's back now looked pale and worried. The security guards who had escorted her out were summoned to Bradley's office and emerged looking shaken. Find her. Bradley ordered a team of staff members. Check every hotel in the area, every restaurant, every beach. Offer her whatever she wants to come back. A free stay, upgrades, anything. But Elena wasn't at any hotel or restaurant. She was still sitting in Ray's shuttle, which was now parked in the employee lot. Ray had offered to let her wait there until her husband arrived, and she'd gratefully accepted. She'd declined his offer to go back and speak to the manager again. They made their choice, she said simply. Now they can deal with the consequences. Ray was impressed by her calm dignity. Most people would be raging, demanding apologies. making threats. But Elena just sat quietly, occasionally checking her phone for updates from her husband. "Your husband must be pretty upset," Ray ventured. Elena smiled slightly. "Alexander doesn't show anger the way most people do. He doesn't yell or make scenes. He's very precise about it." "What does that mean?" Ray asked. "It means he doesn't get mad," Elena replied. "He gets even, but in ways that are perfectly fair and absolutely thorough." Ray whistled. "Sounds like a man I wouldn't want to cross." "He's the kindest person I know," Elena said. "Unless someone hurts people he cares about. Then he's something else entirely." As they talked, the sound of panicked activity could be heard from the resort. Staff members were rushing around, clearly searching for something, or someone. Elena watched them through the shuttle window with a detached interest. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" Ray asked. Elena nodded. "They must have figured out their mistake. Aren't you going to let them know where you are? Let them apologize?" Elena checked her watch. "Alexander's plane will land in 30 minutes. I think I'll just wait for him, if that's okay with you." Ray grinned. "More than okay. I wouldn't miss what happens next for anything." The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the resort's perfect landscaping. In the distance, the faint sound of a helicopter could be heard, growing steadily louder. Elena smiled to herself. Alexander always did know how to make an entrance. The sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air grew louder, drawing the attention of everyone at Sapphire Bay Resort. Guests lounging by the pool shaded their eyes against the setting sun to look up at the sky. Staff members froze in their tracks, conversations dying mid-sentence. The sleek black helicopter circled once before hovering over the resort's private helipad. It bore no logo, just a simple silver stripe along its side, understated but unmistakably expensive like everything Alexander Morgan owned. Inside the shuttle bus, Elena smiled at the familiar sight. "That would be my husband," she told Ray. Ray peered through the windshield, eyes wide. "In the helicopter? I thought you meant he was flying commercial." "Alexander doesn't like to waste time," Elena replied simply. As the helicopter touched down, 3 black SUVs pulled up to the resort entrance, having appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Men in crisp suits and discreet earpieces stepped out, scanning the area with practiced efficiency. "Security," Elena explained before Ray could ask. "Alexander travels with them for business reasons. I prefer not to, when I can avoid it." Ray stared at her with newfound understanding. "Just who exactly is your husband, ma'am?" Elena hesitated. "He runs a company, Morgan Industries." Ray's jaw dropped. "Morgan Industries? The energy company? The one that's worth—" "Something like that," Elena cut in gently. She never liked discussing the numbers. The figures associated with her husband's wealth always felt unreal to her, even after all these years. On the helipad, the door of the helicopter slid open. Alexander Morgan stepped out, ducking slightly under the still spinning blades. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention. He wasn't tall or physically imposing. In fact, he was lean and of average height, but he moved with a quiet confidence that made him seem larger than life. He wore a simple dark suit that had probably cost more than a car, though nothing about it was flashy. His dark hair was slightly windblown from the helicopter, and he ran a hand through it as he spoke to one of the security team members. His expression was calm, but there was a tightness around his eyes that Elena recognized immediately. Alexander was furious. Inside the resort, panic had reached fever pitch. Bradley Wilson paced the lobby, pulling at his collar, which suddenly felt too tight. Vivian hovered nearby, her usually perfect composure shattered. "They've landed," a staff member reported breathlessly, rushing in from outside. "Mr. Morgan is here with a full security team." "Did you find Mrs. Morgan?" Bradley demanded, his voice cracking slightly. The staff member shook his head. "We've checked everywhere. She's not in any of the nearby hotels or restaurants." "This is a disaster," Bradley muttered. His first week as manager, and he'd managed to insult one of the wealthiest men in the world by throwing out his wife. His career in luxury hospitality was over before it had truly begun. The resort's front doors opened and two security members entered, their faces impassive as they scanned the lobby. Behind them came Alexander Morgan. The lobby fell completely silent. Bradley stepped forward, summoning every ounce of professional courtesy he could muster. "Mr. Morgan, welcome to Sapphire Bay. I'm Bradley Wilson, the manager. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Alexander cut him off with a raised hand. His voice was quiet but carried clearly across the silent lobby. "Where is my wife?" The simple question landed like a physical blow. Bradley swallowed hard. We're looking for her, sir. There was an unfortunate incident earlier." "I'm aware of the incident," Alexander replied, his tone glacial. "What I want to know is where my wife is now." We haven't been able to locate her yet," Bradley admitted, feeling sweat bead on his forehead. Alexander's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Let me understand this correctly. You ejected my wife from this resort and now you've lost her entirely." When he put it that way, it sounded even worse. Bradley opened his mouth to explain, but no words came out. Alexander turned to his head of security. "Thomas, find Elena." The man nodded and spoke quietly into his wrist microphone. Within moments, another security team member approached from outside. "Sir, we've located Mrs. Morgan. She's in an employee shuttle bus in the staff parking area." Relief washed over Bradley's face. "Thank goodness. We'll send someone immediately to escort her back." "That won't be necessary," Alexander interrupted. "I'll go to her." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Bradley. "Don't go anywhere, Mr. Wilson. We'll finish this conversation when I return." The quiet promise in those words made Bradley's stomach clench. He had heard stories about Alexander Morgan's business tactics, how he could destroy competitors without raising his voice or showing a hint of emotion. The man was known for his precise, calculated responses to any perceived slight or challenge. Outside, Alexander walked briskly toward the staff parking lot, his security team falling into step behind him. He spotted the shuttle bus and quickened, his pace slightly, the only outward sign of his eagerness to reach his wife. Inside the bus, Elena saw him coming and opened the door, stepping down onto the pavement. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the short distance. Then Alexander closed the gap between them in a few quick strides and wrapped his arms around her. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his public mask falling away as he held her. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Just a bit embarrassed, that's all." Alexander pulled back slightly to look at her face, his eyes searching hers. "You have nothing to be embarrassed about. They're the ones who should be ashamed." Elena smiled up at him. After 12 years together, his protectiveness still warmed her heart. "I know, but it wasn't pleasant being escorted out while people stared." A muscle in Alexander's jaw tightened. He turned toward the shuttle bus where Ray still sat in the driver's seat, watching them with unabashed curiosity. "You helped my wife when the resort staff wouldn't," Alexander said to him. "Thank you." Ray nodded, suddenly nervous in the presence of such obvious power. "Just doing what anyone would do, sir." "Not anyone," Alexander replied. "What's your name?" "Raymond Diaz, sir. Everyone calls me Ray." Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Ray. "If you ever need anything, Mr. Diaz, call this number, day or night." Ray took the card with slightly shaking hands. It was simple white cardstock with just a phone number embossed in black. No name, no company logo. Because when you were Alexander Morgan, you didn't need to identify yourself. "Thank you, sir," Ray managed. Alexander nodded once, then turned, back to Elena. "Are you ready to go in?" "Do we have to?" she asked. "We could just find another resort." Alexander's expression softened as he looked at her. "We could, but I think it would be better to stay." "Because you want to make a point?" Elena knew her husband well. "Because I want people to understand that they can't treat others this way regardless of who they are or what they're wearing," he replied. He squeezed her hand gently. "And yes, I want to make a point." Elena sighed but nodded. "All right." But promise me you won't be too harsh. I promise to be exactly as harsh as the situation deserves, Alexander replied, which wasn't quite the same thing. Elena knew that tone. It meant his mind was made up. Together, they walked back toward the resort, flanked by the security team. Resort staff members who had been watching from windows quickly disappeared from view as they approached. Guests lounging near the entrance suddenly found their phones fascinating as the couple passed. In the lobby, Bradley Wilson stood exactly where Alexander had left him, looking as though he hadn't dared move a muscle. His face paled further when he saw Elena walking beside Alexander. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, his voice strained. "Please accept our most sincere apologies for the misunderstanding earlier. We've prepared the presidential suite for you with our compliments for your entire stay." Elena simply looked at him, making no effort to ease his discomfort. The memory of being escorted out while staff members snickered was still fresh in her mind. Alexander's voice cut through the awkward silence. "Mr. Wilson, I'd like to speak with whoever owns this property." Bradley swallowed hard. "Mr. Davidson is the owner, sir. He's not on site, but I can arrange a call." "Already done," a new voice announced. They turned to see Vivian approaching with a tablet. "Mr. Davidson is on video conference waiting to speak with you." Alexander took the tablet and looked at the screen, where the anxious face of the resort's owner appeared. "Mr. Davidson, I believe we have several things to discuss." "Mr. Morgan," the owner replied, his voice tinny through the tablet's speakers. "I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry we are for today's inexcusable incident." "Yet here you are beginning to express it," Alexander observed coolly. "I'm not interested in apologies, Mr. Davidson. I'm interested in accountability." The lobby had grown so quiet that the gentle splashing of the decorative fountain seemed thunderous. Everyone watched, barely breathing, as one of the world's most powerful businessmen held the tablet, his expression giving nothing away. "Of course," Davidson said quickly. "I take full responsibility. The staff involved will be disciplined immediately and—" "The staff were following the example set by their leadership," Alexander interrupted, glancing pointedly at Bradley. "The problem isn't with individuals, Mr. Davidson. It's systemic." Elena touched her husband's arm gently, a silent reminder of her request for mercy. Alexander's expression softened slightly at her touch. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued, addressing both the tablet and everyone in the lobby. "My wife and I will stay as planned. During our time here, I'll be evaluating every aspect of how this resort treats its guests, all its guests, not just the ones who arrive in private helicopters." The implications of his words hung in the air. A simple vacation had just turned into a high-stakes inspection that could make or break careers, possibly even the resort itself. Night had fallen over Sapphire Bay Resort, but sleep was the last thing on anyone's mind. News of the day's events had spread through the resort like wildfire. Guests whispered about it over dinner, while staff members exchanged worried glances as they went about their duties. In the presidential suite, Elena stood on the balcony, looking out at the moonlight dancing across the ocean waves. The room behind her was larger than the entire first floor of the house she'd grown up in, decorated with an elegance that bordered on extravagance. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases, champagne chilled in a silver bucket, and a massive fruit basket had been arranged artfully on the dining table, all peace offerings that had appeared since their arrival. Alexander emerged from the bedroom, having changed from his suit into more casual clothes. He joined Elena on the balcony, slipping an arm around her waist. "Feeling better?" he asked softly. She leaned against him. "I wasn't really feeling bad to begin with. Just, I don't know. Embarrassed, I guess." "You have nothing to be embarrassed about," Alexander reminded her. "I know that logically," Elena replied, "but it still felt awful, being treated like I didn't belong." She turned to face him. "It made me think about people who go through that every day, and don't have a billionaire husband about to swoop in and fix everything." Alexander studied her face in the moonlight. Even after all these years, her compassion still amazed him. Where others might be plotting revenge, she was thinking about the bigger picture. "I've been thinking the same thing," he admitted. "This isn't just about us." "What are you planning?" Elena asked, knowing her husband well enough to recognize when his mind was working on a problem. Alexander smiled slightly. Something more constructive than just firing everyone involved. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Alexander gave Elena's hand a gentle squeeze before going to answer it. Thomas, the head of security, stood in the hallway. "Sir, the information you requested," he said, handing Alexander a tablet. "Thank you, Thomas. Get some rest." After Thomas left, Alexander returned to the balcony, studying the tablet's screen with intense focus. Elena recognized that look. It was the same one he wore when solving complex business problems. "What's that?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. "Background on the resort's operations," he replied. "Financials, management structure, staff training protocols." He scrolled through the data. "And as I suspected, there's a pattern here." "What kind of pattern?" "Complaints. Mostly dismissed or buried, but they're there if you know where to look." He showed her the screen. "See these? All from guests who felt mistreated in some way. And there's a common thread. They didn't fit the resort's idea of what wealthy people should look like." Elena frowned. "So what happened to me wasn't just a one-time mistake." "No," Alexander agreed. "It's systematic. The resort trains its staff to identify high-value guests based on appearance, belongings, how they arrive. It's all coded into their service protocols." Elena took the tablet, scrolling through the complaints. A woman in a wheelchair who was repeatedly asked if she was in the right place. A man wearing traditional cultural clothing who was seated in the back of the restaurant, despite having reservations for a premium table. A family speaking Spanish who were followed by security. She looked up, her expression troubled. "This is awful." "It is," Alexander agreed. "And it stops now." "How?" Elena asked, though she suspected he already had a plan. Alexander always had a plan. "First, I'm going to have a conversation with the staff tomorrow morning. All of them, not just management." His tone was determined. "Then we'll move on to phase 2. Which is?" Alexander's smile was slight, but significant. "Making this place live up to its potential." Downstairs in his office, Bradley Wilson was having the worst night of his professional career. He sat at his desk, surrounded by personnel files and training, manuals, desperately trying to figure out how to save his job, possibly his entire career. His phone rang, making him jump. It was Mr. Davidson, the owner, calling for the 5th time that evening. "Any updates?" Davidson demanded without preamble. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan are settled in the presidential suite," Bradley reported. "All the special accommodations have been arranged as you instructed. The staff has been briefed to provide exceptional service." "That's not enough," Davidson snapped. "Morgan could destroy us with a single social media post. Do you understand what's at stake here? He's not just any billionaire. He's connected to everyone who matters in global business." "I understand, sir," Bradley said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I've arranged for a special breakfast tomorrow, a private yacht tour of the bay, He doesn't care about perks," Davidson interrupted. "The man has his own island in the Pacific. He can buy this entire resort with what he makes in interest in a single day. This isn't about luxury, it's about respect." Bradley fell silent, the truth of those words sinking. "And Morgan's assistant called," Davidson continued, his voice slightly calmer. "He's requested a meeting with all staff tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Everyone, Wilson. From you down to the gardeners and dishwashers." Bradley felt his stomach drop. "All staff? But that's over 200 people. And every single one of them had better be there," Davidson replied. "Morgan doesn't make requests like this lightly. Whatever he's planning, it's big." After the call ended, Bradley put his head in his hands. His perfect career trajectory: elite hospitality school, fast-track management program, youngest resort manager in the company's history, all potentially ruined because he'd judged a woman by her clothes. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his entire career learning how to cater to the ultra-wealthy, studying their preferences, anticipating their needs. And he'd failed to recognize one of the wealthiest women in the world when she stood right in front of him, simply because she didn't match his preconceived image. Morning came too quickly for many at Sapphire Bay. By 6:45 a.m., staff members gathered nervously in the grand ballroom, everyone from executive chefs to housekeepers, valet attendants to accountants. Many had been called in on their day off. Others had stayed overnight, afraid to go home in case they were needed. Bradley stood at the front, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Beside him, Vivian checked her tablet repeatedly, ensuring everyone on the staff roster was present. "Is he really going to fire all of us?" a young housekeeper whispered to her colleague. "I heard he's buying the resort just to shut it down," another staff member murmured. "That's ridiculous," a senior waiter scoffed, though he looked far from certain. At precisely 7 a.m., the ballroom doors opened. Alexander Morgan entered, followed by Elena. The room fell completely silent. Alexander walked to the front, his presence commanding the space without effort. Elena stayed slightly behind him, her expression unreadable. "Good morning," Alexander began, his voice carrying easily through the large room. "I appreciate you all being here at this hour. I know many of you are wondering why I've called this meeting." He paused, looking around the room, making eye contact with various staff members. No one dared speak. Yesterday, my wife arrived at this resort alone. She was dressed casually and carried a single suitcase. Based solely on her appearance, she was judged, disrespected, and ultimately removed from the property. His tone remained even, which somehow made his words more impactful than if he'd shouted them. Elena stepped forward to stand beside him, and Alexander continued. "I could tell you who we are. I could list the companies I own, the boards I sit on, the people who take my calls. I could mention that I was considering buying a significant stake in this resort's parent company." He shook his head slightly, but that would miss the point entirely. He moved away from the podium, choosing instead to walk slowly along the front of the room. "The point is not who my wife and I are. The point is that no human being should be treated the way she was treated yesterday. No guest should be judged by their clothes, their accent, the color of their skin, or any other superficial factor." Many staff members lowered their eyes, uncomfortable under his steady gaze. "I've reviewed your training materials and your service protocols," Alexander continued. "I've read the complaints that have been filed and subsequently dismissed. I see a pattern of behavior that suggests yesterday's incident wasn't a mistake. It was the predictable outcome of a flawed system." Bradley Wilson shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. "I had several options for how to respond," Alexander said. "The easiest would have been to make a few calls, ensure that those directly responsible lost their jobs, and move on. But that wouldn't solve the underlying problem." He turned to look at Elena, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Instead, I've made a decision that will affect everyone in this room." Alexander paused, and the tension in the ballroom became almost unbearable. Some staff members looked as though they might faint from anxiety. "As of this morning, I have acquired a controlling interest in Sapphire Bay Resort." The announcement sent a shockwave through the room. Gasps and murmurs broke out among the staff. Bradley Wilson looked as though he'd been struck. "This is not a punishment," Alexander clarified, raising his hand for quiet. "It's an opportunity for all of us, an opportunity to transform this beautiful property into something truly exceptional, not just in terms of luxury, but in terms of humanity." Elena stepped forward then, speaking for the first time. "My husband and I believe that true luxury isn't about marble floors or champagne on arrival. It's about how you make people feel. Everyone, regardless of what they're wearing or how they arrive, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." Her voice was gentle but firm, and many staff members found themselves nodding in agreement. Alexander took over again. "Starting today, we're implementing changes. New training programs, revised service protocols, different performance metrics. Success at this resort will no longer be measured solely by revenue, but by guest satisfaction across all demographics." He turned to Bradley Wilson. "Mr. Wilson, your role will be changing. You'll be working closely with a consultant who specializes in inclusive hospitality practices." Bradley swallowed hard, realizing he wasn't being fired outright, though whether this was better or worse remained to be seen. "I don't expect perfection overnight," Alexander concluded. "What I do expect is commitment to change from everyone." Those of you who embrace this new direction will find it rewarding. Those who cannot. He let the implication hang in the air. As the meeting ended and staff began to disperse, a mixture of relief, confusion, and cautious optimism spread through the group. They had expected wrath and retribution. Instead, they'd been offered a second chance, albeit one with very clear expectations attached. Elena watched her husband as he spoke quietly with Thomas about the next steps. Despite his calm exterior, she knew how deeply yesterday's incident had affected him. Alexander had grown up with nothing, worked his way through college on scholarships, built his first business from a dorm room. He never forgot what it felt like to be judged and dismissed based on appearances. That, more than anything else, explained the action he'd taken today. It wasn't about revenge. It was about changing a system that hurt people like the man he used to be. 6 months passed, and Sapphire Bay Resort had undergone a transformation that went far beyond fresh paint and new furniture. The changes ran deeper, touching every aspect of how the resort operated, from hiring practices to guest interactions. Elena stood on the same balcony where she and Alexander had talked that first night, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The view was the same, but almost everything else had changed. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Alexander joined her, handing her a cup of tea, chamomile with honey, her favorite. "Just thinking about how far this place has come," she replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "Remember that first morning when you called the staff meeting? Everyone looked terrified." Alexander smiled. "They thought I was going to fire them all. Instead, you gave them a masterclass in how to treat people." Elena took a sip of her tea. "I'm proud of what you've built here." "What we've built," he corrected gently. "Your input has been invaluable." Elena laughed softly. "All I did was suggest a few changes to the training program, and redesign the staff uniforms to be more comfortable, and create the community outreach program, and convince me not to fire Bradley on the spot." Alexander counted off on his fingers. "Should I continue?" Fine, Elena conceded. "We did it together." From inside the suite, Alexander's phone chimed with a message. He checked it quickly. "The new guests have arrived for the special weekend. Reception says everything's going smoothly." Elena smiled. This weekend had been her idea, and one she was particularly proud of. Downstairs in the lobby, a group of 20 people were being welcomed to Sapphire Bay. They looked around in wonder at the luxury surrounding them, many seeming slightly overwhelmed. "I've never stayed anywhere this fancy," whispered a middle-aged woman to her husband as a bellhop took their modest luggage. "Me neither," he replied quietly. "Are you sure we belong here?" Bradley Wilson, still the resort manager but now a changed man, approached the group with a genuine smile. "Welcome to Sapphire Bay. We're delighted you could join us for this special weekend." 6 months ago, Bradley would have dismissed these guests as not fitting the resort's profile. They weren't wearing designer clothes or flashing expensive watches. They hadn't arrived in luxury cars or private planes. But Bradley had learned his lesson, perhaps better than anyone. "Your rooms are ready," he continued. "We've prepared welcome packages in each one, and there will be a reception dinner at 7 in the oceanfront dining room." A young woman raised her hand hesitantly. "Excuse me, but I think there must be some mistake. We're the community college scholarship group, right? These look like really expensive rooms." Bradley smiled. "There's no mistake. You're our honored guests this weekend, and you'll be staying in our premium ocean view suites." The group exchanged glances of surprise and delight as they were escorted to their rooms. This was Elena's brainchild, a program that opened the resort to those who could never normally afford it. Every month, Sapphire Bay hosted a different group: scholarship students, exceptional teachers from underfunded schools, healthcare workers from community clinics, families facing medical hardships. The entire experience, from accommodation to meals to activities, was provided at no cost to them. When Elena first proposed the idea, Alexander had immediately seen its value, not just as a goodwill gesture, but as practical training for the EY staff. It challenged them to provide their best service to everyone, regardless of appearance or background. Back in the presidential suite, Elena and Alexander dressed for dinner. They always joined these special weekend groups for their first meal at the resort, a tradition Elena insisted upon. "Do you remember that bellhop from our first day here?" Elena asked as she fastened a simple pearl necklace around her neck. "The one who tried to tell Bradley he was making a mistake about me?" Alexander nodded. "Chen, he's floor manager now. He stopped me yesterday to show me pictures of his kids," Elena said. "He told me his oldest daughter wants to be a doctor. I suggested he look into our scholarship program for her." Alexander smiled. "Already thinking ahead? The girl can't be more than 10. It's never too early," Elena replied, thinking of her own childhood and how different her life might have been with more opportunities. Every child deserves a chance, regardless of where they start. Downstairs in the dining room, the scholarship students and their advisors were being seated for dinner. They still looked slightly out of place, some clearly uncomfortable with the formal setting and multiple forks at each place setting. Bradley Wilson noticed their discomfort and quietly signaled to the staff. Immediately the servers adjusted, their approach becoming warmer and more informal, explaining the menu in simpler terms and reassuring the guests that there was no wrong way to enjoy their meal. It was a small thing, but it represented the heart of the changes at Sapphire Bay: flexibility, empathy, and genuine desire to make everyone feel welcome. When Alexander and Elena entered the dining room, a hush fell over the tables. Despite his efforts to keep his ownership of the resort low profile, Alexander Morgan was still a recognizable figure, his face occasionally appearing in business magazines and news segments. "Good evening, everyone," he greeted the group. "My wife and I are delighted to welcome you to Sapphire Bay." One of the older students leaned toward her friend. "That's Alexander Morgan," she whispered. "The clean energy guy. My dad says he's changed the entire industry." Elena noticed the whispering and smiled. She was used to this reaction to her husband. What still surprised her, even after all these years, was how little it changed who Alexander was at his core. As dinner progressed, Elena and Alexander moved from table to table, speaking with each group of students. They asked about their studies, their aspirations, their challenges. Alexander offered business cards to several who expressed interest in clean energy or technology, promising internship interviews when they were ready. "My mom works 2 jobs to help me stay in school," one young man told Elena, his eyes bright with determination. "I'm going to make sure it pays off for her." Elena nodded, understanding completely. That's how real success happens, not just for yourself, but for the people who believe in you. Later that evening, after the dinner had concluded, Elena and Alexander took a walk along the beach. The resort's lights glittered behind them, while ahead stretched the darkness of the ocean under a star-filled sky. "I got a call from Ray today," Elena mentioned, referring to the shuttle driver who had helped her 6 months ago. "How is he enjoying his new position?" Alexander asked. After the incident, Alexander had offered Ray a job as the resort's transportation manager, overseeing a fleet of vehicles that was much more impressive than the single shuttle he had driven before. "He loves it," Elena replied. "His daughter just got accepted to college, first one in their family. He says the new salary means she won't have to take out loans." Alexander nodded, satisfied. "Good. That's how change happens. One person, one family at a time." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of waves washing against the shore filling the night air. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Elena asked suddenly. "If they hadn't kicked me out that day?" Alexander considered the question. "If they had recognized you and given you the presidential suite without question?" He shook his head slightly. "We would have had our vacation. I would have finalized the investment in the parent company. Everything would have continued as it was. All those people who've benefited from the changes we made," Elena mused, "would still be waiting for someone else to make them." Alexander finished. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes." Elena slipped her hand into his. "It's strange to think that getting kicked out of a fancy resort was one of the most meaningful things to happen to me." "Not to me," Alexander replied. Because it revealed once again what I've always known about you. He turned to face her, his expression soft in the moonlight. That your worth has nothing to do with how you dress or what you own. It's who you are that matters. Back at the resort, lights still glowed in some of the rooms where scholarship students were no doubt marveling at their unexpected luxury accommodations. In one of those rooms, a young woman stood on her balcony, looking out at the same ocean, view that Elena had admired earlier. The student had grown up in a neighborhood where vacation meant visiting relatives in the next town over. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined staying somewhere like Sapphire Bay. Yet here she was, being treated like she belonged, like her presence was valued. She didn't know the story of Elena Morgan and how she had been judged and dismissed in this very place 6 months ago. She didn't know how that moment had triggered changes that eventually made it possible for a scholarship student like her to experience such luxury. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, she was somewhere exclusive and wasn't made to feel like an outsider. In the morning, she would attend a workshop led by industry professionals who might offer her opportunities that had previously seemed unreachable. Her future was opening up in ways she hadn't dared to imagine. This was the true transformation of Sapphire Bay, not just a resort that offered exceptional service to wealthy guests, but a place that recognized the potential and worth of every person who walked through its doors. A place where no one was judged by appearances, where everyone was treated with the same dignity and respect. It had begun with a simple woman in jeans and a sweater, kicked out because she didn't look like she belonged, and it had become something that would change countless lives for years to come. Alexander had been right that first night. It was never just about them or what had happened to Elena. It was about creating a ripple effect that would spread far beyond the walls of Sapphire Bay Resort. And as Elena and Alexander walked back along the beach hand in hand, they knew that some journeys begin in the most unexpected ways, even with a humiliating ejection from a place you were meant to be.